everybody. Thank you for the nice welcome. I'm going to talk about challenges of managing CoreFX repo today. So let's get started. This is what I want to cover, how we're going to get through all of this. First, much more definition of what the CoreFX is versus what's the relation of the repo towards .NET Core. I'm going to spend some time actually on talking about GitHub issue tracking and challenges or limitations of the GitHub notifications, which are actually important for the team that kind of works on CoreFX repo. I'm going to as well call out some interesting stuff around APIs in BCL. BCL is the base class libraries, so imagine collections and all other beautiful things. How we add new APIs, how we think about that, when it is yes, when it is no, how we obsolete APIs, whether it's not as simple as one would think. And at the end, I would like to look a little bit at involving community, how we try to involve community and being kind of open in the open source world. What does it mean, and what's impact on team culture and that type of stuff. So if you don't like it, or if it's not something what you expected, feel free to leave. I'm not going to be offended. Don't worry about it. Let's get started. So first, what's CoreFX repo? If you haven't seen that, actually, let me ask you guys, who have seen CoreFX repo? Who have been on GitHub? All right, it's new for you. Thank you, Adam. So this is on GitHub. We have .NET/CoreFX repo. That's where actually all the source code for the BCL, the base class libraries, lives. It's roughly 50 namespaces, and it's it's part or one of the key parts of the .NET Core framework. Now, what's not in CoreFX repo, it's actually more important, kind of make sure to list that. What's not there is the runtime itself. So that's CoreCLR repo. That's where the JIT lives, that's where GC lives, and that's basically mostly C++ code, plus maybe 10% is managed code in CoreCLR repo. That's the kind of core types like string and that are tightly coupled with the runtime. But the rest, including tests actually for those types, lives in BCL. So BCL is all the namespaces. I have listed few: collections, IO, link, data, net, as in networking, reflection, runtime, and others. Other things actually that are not in CoreFX repo, and actually it's not .NET, or there's confusion. What is .NET Core versus ASP.NET Core? You could view it as the .NET Core is the runtime and BCL, and ASP.NET Core is the ASP.NET layer on top of it. Of course, people often, when they talk about .NET Core, they mean both of these layers. And anyway, it doesn't matter too much, but I just want to call out I'm not involved in ASP.NET Core. Actually, ASP.NET Core repos are under github.com/ASP.NET /something else. That's a different team, so I'm not going to speak on behalf of that. And there's WCF and Entity Framework are separate repos as well, not included in this. And there are a couple of other kind of namespaces, more from larger .NET Framework, for example, XAML and UI as in WPF, which are not part of CoreFX repo. So just explaining, what I'm talking about, so that you don't draw, incorrect conclusions based on what I'm mentioning here. So who are the people behind the CoreFX repo, which means roughly 50 namespaces I described. If you look actually at GitHub, contributors, and you click on each person and find out oh, is this Microsoft employee or not, you're going to find out that there's roughly 40 active engineers in there. It doesn't mean that the 40 Microsoft engineers are working only there. Most of them are actually working in other repos as well, like CoreCLR, WCF, and whatever, because there are kind of overlaps. So those are not exclusive people only for CoreFX, but that's roughly the amount of people from a couple of teams around Microsoft kind of contributing there. Interestingly, that's sometimes not clear, is that our in Microsoft we don't the ownership and expertise is not divided by you work on .NET Framework, you work on .NET Core, you work on WWP. It's more about okay, you're expert on collections across all those stacks. So it's not about stack base, it's really technology. Same, for example, networking. The experts on networking own the networking stack in all the all the free runtimes or stacks that we have, which is UWP, .NET Core, and .NET Framework. Now it's actually mono, but it's historically slightly different team acquired from Xamarin, but we work together, try to reuse code as well. So. But again, it's about technology, it's not about the stack. And I want to just call out that there are much more teams behind the doing the end-to-end. I already call out, for example, the ASP.NET Core, which is on top of that. I call out the CoreCLR parts, which is the runtime and JIT. There's infrastructure, as in like how we run tests and whatever other things. That's, of course, for the end-to-end, it's necessary, because if you don't have infrastructure, you don't have tests, you cannot run anything. There's the CLI, command line interface, SDK, as in part, that's what you install, basically. There's project system in Visual Studio, NuGet, the Visual Studio itself. Like, if you look at that, there's like much more than just this. So again, I'm trying to talk about very, from the whole end-to-end story, kind of very narrow piece that I can comment on, because it's what we do. So now that you have expectations, what's the topic I'm talking about. So this is actually a snapshot as of yesterday, I believe, or 2 days ago, on the number of issues that actually we have you have in CoreFX. So you can see that there's like roughly 2,100 active issues and 8,200 closed ones. On the repo is actually 2.5 years old, I believe, public. So in the, just to kind of give you, example of like how many issues we went through. That's 10,000 issues altogether in 2.5 years. That's a non-trivial amount of issues. Let me put it this way, just to find, duplicates and everything. Personally, I'm a little bit, as well self-blaming, but unhappy about the number of issues opened currently, because in May we were at 1,500, 1,600. We kind of, didn't pay good attention to kind of getting the number down. That's something that we will very soon have to kind of focus on. Another kind of interesting metric on the, for example, CoreFX repo is number of PRs, which is actually interesting. So first of all, we try to keep the open PRs number. I think again it's like from 2 days ago, pretty low. So we're overall, when we are under 30, that's a really happy place. Under 50, it's still manageable. Overall, we try to not kind of keep PRs open. Okay, if you're not familiar, by the way, with GitHub, PR is pull request, which means when you basically suggest a change, that's kind of the code change. So we're trying not to keep PR extending and open for too long. Honestly, like, my personal goal is like, if it's for more than 3 weeks old, I'm trying to start to pushing on people like, what's up with this? What's happening? Nothing, how come it hasn't updated in 1 week? We don't want to try to sit on top of, issues or PRs for too long. Interestingly, in the 2.5 years, roughly, give or take, we went through 15,000 almost of PRs. That's quite a lot of numbers. That's quite a lot of code reviews and that stuff. Until recently, actually, I thought that the CoreFX, if I look actually CoreFX and CoreCLR repo, I think that CoreFX has slightly higher numbers than CoreCLR. So CoreCLR is about the same, maybe like 20–30% lower numbers of the PRs and issues. I actually looked at other large repos just for fun. Microsoft, there are 2 outstanding. One is Rosalyn. I believe they have around 4,000 or 3,000 open issues, and probably like 50% or double the number of PRs, even closed. And VS Code is actually, I don't remember the numbers, but it was like, twice or 4 times number of issues. Like they have really, large number of issues, not only open, but as well closed. Over there, that's because like in VS Code, apparently, you can file issue just from basically filing bug, out from the IDE itself. It's like, hey, something doesn't work, you click button and it creates the issue on your behalf on GitHub. So that's why they get probably kind of higher churn. So we're not the worst or we're the largest, but we're pretty at the top of the sizable repos, just FYI. This number of PRs and issues comes with a tax. And monthly we get roughly 500, 600 new issues, roughly 700 PRs every month. That's a lot. And if you ever were on GitHub, you get notifications. You get notification to web UI or via emails. It's roughly 400 to 500 per day. That's a lot. And as one of our top contributors, or not top contributors, one of our key contributors actually mentioned, when we added him as collaborator, when you start getting all those notifications, especially via email, it feels like you've been DOSed, because it's really overwhelming. Anyway, we have a couple of people who are capable of reading all of those. I don't understand. I'm not one of them. So this is quote, by the way, from Ben Adams, if you know him. All right, so what do we do about that? Now imagine that every single developer on our team, from the 40 engineers, right, roughly, would have to monitor all those things. That's a tax. That's like, I don't know, it would mean probably like few hours, a couple of hours a day, maybe 1 hour. That's a lot of kind of overhead just to monitoring and figuring like what applies to me, what I should look at, and that stuff. So we have the repo divided kind of to logical areas. In the sense, like, there's, for example, the collections, link and other things, and networking, and even networking has like 4 sub-areas, or numerics, whatever other things you see over here. And the idea is that kind of each of the areas has has an owner, 1 or 2 people, or owner or expert, whatever you call it. And those people are responsible for monitoring that particular area. It's, they're much more, when you kind of look at only part of the repo, only specific issues, you're much more able to say like, hey, is it duplicate? Is it something similar? Is it to some other issue? Is it something that we have seen maybe in other products like .NET Framework, because CoreFX repo is only about .NET Core, actually a little bit about UWP as well, but it doesn't track any .NET Framework issues. So that kind of helps people focus. This is how we kind of diced and sliced the entire repo into kind of parts. Unfortunately, GitHub doesn't allow you to really say like, hey, I'm interested only in these notifications. Basically, either you get everything, or you get nothing, or you get only those that you manually subscribe to. That doesn't quite scale, so that's why I came up with tooling roughly a year ago, which kind of sends you email notifications only whenever something is coming or outgoing from your area. In theory, it's actually a general query. So, for example, if I own networking, for example, I'm one of those receiving emails, I will say like, hey, if it's area this, or area this, or area that, or area that, that's my query, and tell me whenever something comes in or something comes out, which means there's a new, oops. Do we have some technicians here? 1 second, please. Okay. All right. Where was I? In the queries. Yeah. So basically, it's going to tell you, hey, something came to your area, which means there's a new PR, there's a new issue, and the people can kind of, the experts can kind of look at it, find out, hey, can I triage it? Should I do something about that? And in theory, we're kind of asking them, like, please, subscribe to that issue so you can get more issues. It's not ideal, but that's kind of workaround for missing, GitHub features, because GitHub is more tailored towards smaller repos. We're kind of not playing by the rules. We're pretty large from the perspective, but to keep some sanity, we have to kind of like separate those things. The tooling is not ideal. It doesn't have, it doesn't inform you about that, hey, someone commented on an issue in an area. It doesn't have like configuration, something like, hey, I would like to web view. It doesn't have any web view. Or I want emails every hour or only once per day or something like that. So it's very rough, but anyway, it's useful. Interestingly, even community members have similar problems. They would love to be on, there's quite a handful of people who love to be on top of what's happening. And they actually create similar things how they monitor new incoming things, like issues and PRs. And there's some tooling from, I believe David Glick, one of the MVPs, and they actually, send the note, whenever there's a new issue, PR, they tweet it. On one of the accounts. And there's CoreFX issues, and I think there's CoreFX lab issues, and it's kind of not one-on-one mapping. It's like CoreStealer and CoreFX repos are in the CoreFX issues, and it's a little bit weird setup. But anyway, when you look at that, it's, when I look at that, it's almost sad that we are using Twitter to find out what's new, what's happening, in GitHub. But anyway, that's how community members kind of worked around the problem or similar problem. So these area issues help our engineers basically to focus on just like one thing on their area of expertise. All right. This is, roughly how the tooling looks like. So actually, it's for networking, and this is a snapshot from half a year ago, but the principle is the same. So we're talking about UWP 6 here. You get email like this that, hey, there's a new issue or closed PR or closed issue. This is the title. Here are the labels. If it's assigned to someone, what's the milestone? Those are kind of the most typical things that are interesting. Anyway, just FYI. So it turns out that there's a great tooling out there, Octobox IO, which actually tries to solve similar problem, except So I'm going to first describe the tooling. So if you've ever seen it, like I encourage you to kind of check it out. It's actually maintainer is Andrew Nesbitt. I had some talks with him as well, if we could extend it. And actually, it turns out that they are, this thing is only sitting on top of existing notifications in GitHub. It doesn't do more than that, which is, which means that it doesn't do queries and things, but maybe it could be a little bit extended. But it's a great tool for kind of more open source contributors when you have your fingers and you are contributing to multiple repos. So in here, it feels almost like email box. It's like inbox, like, hey, what's active? Archive is basically almost like you delete. Start is like you mark it as important, right? And then you can look at like subcategories where have been mentioned, what type of things, if you want to filter only PRs or only issues. And then over here, which is not listed, there is a list of the repos that actually you subscribe to, so you can look only at, for example, hey, I'm interested only my notifications for ASP.NET, all repos underneath that. So you can kind of like slice and dice if you're across multiple repos. That's very, very handy. Unfortunately, we need something opposite. We have one large things, and we need to kind of like narrow it down, and it's not supported. But over long term, this is something that we would like to integrate back. So with help of the community, we kind of put together, at least so far, only plans for kind of the GitHub issues tooling v2. This is actually coming from community member. Our idea is that we're gonna kind of take different sources of of notifications, including some, in Microsoft Data Lake, store it somewhere, and then be able to feed the notifications even into something like Octobox IO I showed just before, and have some UI that as well. Maybe of our own, just for starters. Anyway, so if you're interested in this stuff, we could use some help. The project has been a little bit, on back burner for me for last half a year, but I expect that actually in December there's going to be some more work done. Actually, I did some work roughly 3 weeks ago. So next thing I would like to talk about how we deal with issues. How we triage issues and what does it mean. And it's kind of, anyway, let's walk through that. So first thing, each issue, when it comes, we label it with area thing. That's something that usually me and Dan, my peer, kind of every morning and then, a couple of times a day, we just check out what's new and mark it, label it. That's actually that then helps the tooling to find out that, oh, there's something new in this area. Let me send the email notification to the area owner. So that's more for us and more kind of our ability to look only at one thing. Second thing actually we kind of try to enforce is that the assignee is empty. Now, if you wonder why, the motivation for that is that we have, in the past, we actually used assignee as like, hey, that person owns the area. And what happens over time, that people move between teams, or they don't own collections anymore, they own networking, that just happens every, I don't know, few months, at least someone switches. And you will have to go and change the owner of everyone, and of course we forget, right? Nobody is perfect. So that didn't work out, and on top of that, it was actually not good and healthy for the ecosystem or for the kind of community, because people coming outside, when they want to contribute, they looked at issue and said like, oh, it's assigned to someone, great. It's gonna be taken care of. Guess what? So that's why we try to keep assignees empty, unless someone is working on that at that moment or very soon will be. We're not perfect, but roughly that's the idea what we're pushing, and it was actually pretty successful. Other thing is that we want to, as many issues as possible to have up for grabs, which means welcoming community, like, yep, this is something that you guys can help us with, and usually we put there as well some kind of next steps and complexity description, including like, hey, this is extremely complex. You have to be worried about compatibility. It's gonna be tricky. We will need lots of tests, and by the way, this is roughly where you should start, something like that. Again, I would say that 50% cases we're successful putting these comments, and they're pretty useful, what I heard, to kind of potential contributors. Other thing is actually milestone. We're trying to push for, if you set milestone, basically default it to future, unless you can really, 95% sure that we're gonna really fix it in specific release, which right now is the next one is 2.1. Now you could look at that. Why do you do that? There are two huge advantages. First of all, I kind of hate when, or I think that everyone hates that, when you have issues in like, the next milestone, and then like, 1 month before we shipping, suddenly we move everything into the future one. Everyone is like, what? You had it in 1.2.1, why are we moving to 2.2? I kind of wanted that fix in 2.1, and I think it's important. So that's first thing. Second thing is actually if you set it to future, and community notices that because there are no GitHub notifications for change milestone. But anyway, whoever filed it or someone else notices that, they can say like, hey guys, you have it in future, but it's actually important. It's hurting me in production. And there are 10 other people who are actually complaining something like that because sometimes we miss things. So it kind of encourages as well start of discussion in case that our assessment of future or kind of the impact future versus 2.1 or something closer was wrong. The other thing actually we'd use is issue type label, which is bug enhancement. There's test bug, test enhancement, documentation, and actually a couple of like API needs work, API suggestion, API ready for review, and API approved. In theory, those, if it's a bug or test bug, typically you don't know, or typically, if someone comes and says like, hey, if I do this and that, like it's wrong, that's probably a bug. You can usually say like, what's difference between enhancement and bug? But for example, if it's test failure, unless you investigate, you don't know which it is. Anyway, we're not too hardcore about that. Honestly, the difference between test bug, who cares? Like, we don't do too deep dives into, having fancy kind of management views telling us like, hey, you have so many test issues, you have so many real issues. But what's important on this is actually the API. The API labels are extremely useful for us because they help us track, what things will add new APIs. Because adding new APIs is a big deal. I'm going to talk a little bit more about that, but basically, many people don't view that, but once we add an API, it's there forever. We can never, ever remove anything. Because once we remove something, people will be broken. They will be angry. There will be customer applications broken. Nobody wants to do that. So around APIs, we have like pretty API approval on purpose. I'm going to talk a little bit about more because it's something that we have to be careful about. And there are like two more rules which are kind of interesting, or a little bit not how to mark issues. But that's something that I put together to make sure that our engineers are actually aware of that. And first of them is like, don't be afraid to say no or close issues. People, Microsoft employees are often like, oh, if I close it, like they will tell me that it's a bad idea. I will rather not do that. I'm encouraging people like just do that. Like explain why. Be polite. If you're wrong, be ready to change your mind. So that's another thing. Like don't be afraid to be wrong. Engineers are so often to be afraid to be imperfect. What if I make a mistake? It's visible publicly. It's like discussion, right? It's easier to walk on someone and say like, hey, I think this is how it is, and the person tells you no, this is this way. Ah, okay. What about that way? Like you have a discussion on GitHub on issues. It's basically a discussion. So even saying like hey, I don't think it's okay. I don't think it's a valid bug report. I think that it's a problem in your code, and then people convince you otherwise. Like it's a useful discussion to have. We just need to be flexible to new information that appears on the issue. All right, I mentioned APIs, so let's focus a little bit on the APIs. In .NET Core, I believe this is for 2.0. So when I looked at that data, we have roughly so far added like 100 new unique APIs, which are not present in .NET Framework. So over time, over the last, let's say, year, people said like, hey, I would like to have this overload on string.index because you left out the one that has start index and doesn't have the length, or vice versa, or something, and it's more consistent. So we added a couple of those things, or actually get value or default. Like, who wrote that extension method himself? Hands up, I did. Almost everyone usually does. So we finally try to add it to the back to the framework, right? So those are kind of like convenience APIs, mostly convenience overloads. Sometimes those are actually important APIs. Lately, we actually span of T, which is a new concept. We're adding even more APIs, more overloads with span of T, which is more for safety/performance. So the number will be actually much higher now, not just about 100. It will be probably 200 or 300 now. Anyway, so those are the APIs. Those APIs, the idea that eventually they will flow into .NET framework. It's just a matter of timing and that stuff. So I don't think that we have yet set to stone like which release it will be, but the idea is that eventually the things from .NET Core, the new API surface, will be available as well in .NET Framework. It's automatically kind of available in UWP because UWP builds and uses the same sources. It's actually automatically available, mostly automatically available in Mono because Mono reuses lots of sources, our source code as well. The .NET Framework is where we have to kind of manually migrate that stuff, and we do that in waves, but we do that. The whole idea is that we don't want to have kind of the platforms kind of scattered API-wise, right? It would be stupid. It would be like, oh, if you're on this thing, you can use these APIs. If you're on that thing, you can use those APIs. The idea is that the API shape, the BCL, there's only basically one BCL. That's the idea, or at least from customer point of view, from developer point of view. If you know about some APIs, eventually they will come to the platforms and you can use them everywhere. Of course, if you're targeting .NET Framework 2.0, you're not going to have the latest, greatest, but hopefully no one expects that. We cannot fix the past. What other things about APIs? We have kind of it's still not fully formalized, but we have a way how to decide if a new API request or something someone asks for goes into the CoreFX or not. One of the key reasons for yes or no are, for example, hey, if it's new API on existing BCL type, yes, that makes sense, unless it's a good, well, actually, even if it's extension method, like if it's something that's already in BCL, it would be just stupid to not put it into BCL. As I mentioned, some overloads on whatever string, substring, or something like that. Other reason for something, including something actually in CoreFX is, will it be useful by CoreFX itself? Good example is like, it's a year-old issue or half-a-year-old issue, but we don't have priority queue, you might have noticed, in BCL. That's one of the few core types that actually I think that we should bring in. And the decision, and we had lengthy discussions like, are we gonna put it into CoreFX or not? Does it belong there? And basically the deal breaker was like, you know what? We will likely use priority queue as well in some networking stack and elsewhere. So there's very likely that the BCL itself will use it. So that's a reason which usually says like, okay, that's a good candidate to put in the CoreFX. And another question is like, can it live somewhere else, which is the opposite of the same question. A good example are power collections. If you haven't seen them, they're out there for 7 years. I think it was on Codeplex. And the idea is basically that, they have like a bunch of like, I actually don't know even what specific types are there, but they have like fancy, more better, or, more fine-tuned and specialized collections, like dictionary, other things which are performant maybe in some specific workloads. We don't want to add that into CoreFX because otherwise we would end up with gazillion of the collections and things. So those things are basically good to say like, you know what? Let's put them somewhere else. We're actually still discussing that. Hopefully by end of year or early next year, we're gonna finalize the decision. But the idea is to create something like CoreFX extensions and make it more community-driven to kind of find home for these things and where they could kind of live and they could be maintained actually by community. That's actually one key reason why people usually want APIs in CoreFX, and I've seen that they sometimes don't know it themselves. Sometimes they kind of admit that is because they want to say like, no, but I want Microsoft to maintain it. Like, honestly, that's not good enough reason. With that, everyone says like, yeah, I have this kind of special need. Like, you guys maintain it. We would own almost everything, the whole world, very soon. That doesn't scale. So that's why kind of having something like CoreFX extension or some repo which is community, driven, would be useful because it creates a common. Because if you have one type, shipping the one type, your own NuGet, maintaining that, it's a lot of overhead. Some people did that, but not everyone is is able to do that. And even if you do that, it actually takes time before you create enough interest, because people are aware of it, they start using that if you have some specialized collections or things. So having something like CoreFX extensions repo, where basically it's a playground for community, and it's driven by kind of couple of overseen by a couple of community people, might be very interesting. That kind of creates place where people can collaborate easily. They don't have to build their own community from scratch and their own NuGet package from scratch. All right. The last thing I want to talk about is actually about the API process, the approval process. As I mentioned above, before, APIs live forever. Right? Once we add API, we cannot undo it. So we really try to not mess it up. If you ever file something on CoreFX issues, which probably only Adam did based on the number of hands, but many people file issue and then in a week or two, so how's it going? Like, when are you going to approve it? Like, it's simple. It's brand that simple. It's like, chill out. Take it easy. It's actually intentionally a little bit slow, just to give people like time to think it through, especially if it's not slam dunk things. We had APIs which have been approved in under 1 or 2 weeks, but it's really those cases when everyone looks at that like, yep, okay, that's it. And oftentimes, actually, you would be surprised, for example, to get value or default. That, well, first of all, it took time before we got to that, but even the discussion around that, I think it was like 1 hour to decide, oh, does it go on dictionary, or does it go as an extension method on iDictionary and I read only dictionary? And like, what if we do this? Is old code gonna compile? Is it gonna interact with existing extension methods from for our customers? There's so many angles to those things that you would sometimes not believe how difficult it is. However, the good news is, I'm gonna have it later in the slides, we actually do the API approvals now online. It's like we stream it live. It's every Tuesday, Seattle time, 10 to 12 a.m. It's recorded. It's on YouTube channel. So if you're interested, like hey, I wonder how it looks like, you have a good opportunity to actually see what kind of pokes and like questions we raise and do. So I'll be later. So another thing is like when we get PRs, there's certain number of, or certain types of PRs actually that we don't take. And here are some of the key reasons. For example, oftentimes we get performance changes, which are not slam dunk clear that it's a win-win or it's a clear win everywhere. Oftentimes performance are trade-offs. I talked yesterday in the talk, I mentioned that as well. But basically, oftentimes when you do a performance improvement, you're basically trading off maybe, hey, instead of being faster or to be faster, I need to use some more memory. Guess what? Some workloads might like it, some workloads might not. So is it really win, right? Another thing, actually, sometimes we add complexity by adding performance. Is it worth it? Link is a great example. I mentioned yesterday as well. Apologies for the repetition. But in Link, we had a couple of cases that people said, like, oh, we can make it faster for, I don't know, byte array or arrays, and for these things, or for dictionary, and it's gonna be 2x better. It's like, well, but who uses that on dictionary, in the Link? Like, how many people? Is it worth it? Because it's gonna get at yet another if this type, then do, and 5 pages of code, or maybe in better cases 1 or 2 pages. So that's something that we have to kind of carefully think about, and it's not always like hey, we have some perfect improvement, immediately it gets in. All right. Another reason why we actually don't take changes is often compatibility breaking changes. So the compatibility can be like, hey, how is it compatible with previous versions? So right now we're in .NET Core 2.0, we're working on 2.1. So if someone says like, hey, I want to fix, for example, we had examples of we threw null reference exception from some kind of basic like collections API, and people came like, oh no, if you look at the coding guidelines, it should be argument null exception. And we were like, yeah, you're right. And some of our types do that, but is it worth the change? Because guess what? People already learned how that it's a null reference exception. If we change it to different exception, they will not catch it, maybe, or there's going to be definitely a certain number of people who will not catch it, which means we're going to break them. What's the value that it brings? It's still exception. It's like, null reference, argument null reference. Yeah, it's a little bit more purity, but, is it really worth it? So we have to weight kind of the, the impact, the value that it brings, such change against especially breaking changes. Not only against previous releases, but as well against other framework, like Mono, .NET Framework, or UWP. Guess what? What happens, and it's not so rare, that we have something and someone says like, oh, you're incompatible with this thing. Like, great, let's change it. And then we realize, like, wait a sec. But okay, Mono behaves this way, .NET Framework behaves different way, and .NET Core 1.1 behaves even third way. Oh my gosh, what should we choose? What's the right one? So that's sometimes actually an interesting challenge as well, to choose what you want to be compatible with. All right. Overall, as I said, like, we have to kind of weight in not only the value, but as well the risk that we're going to break someone. And we're using actually API usage out of NuGet. I'm going to show you a demo very shortly about that. And basically tell us like, how popular such API is. And that kind of helps us as well as, assess like, hey, if it's used quite a lot, we should be better sure that we don't break it, especially the null reference versus argument null, exception. For example, if it's some kind of unused parts of link or something which has 0.01% of usage, like you want to change exception because it's slightly better. Not sure if I would take the null reference versus argument null reference. But if it's lower usage, the discussion is different than if it's API that 90% of libraries use. So other kind of like similar things or changes like which we take or not take is actually, oftentimes we find APIs which we designed 15 years ago, and guess what? They're not the best. They have limitations. We created something new, like the non-generic collections, for example, or many other things, which we would like to obsolete them. Unfortunately, when you put the obsolete attribute on something, it generates warning. There's tons of customers who treat warnings as errors. This is actually treat as warnings. It's incorrect. But anyway, if we put the attribute in there, it's technically speaking breaking change, which is funny. We use this, we created this API so we can obsolete things, and now we actually cannot. So that's not something we can do easily. In the past, actually, C# team has lots of experiences with that. They basically used to put like obsolete attributes on things. Then they pushed new Rosalyn compiler with new BCL, and suddenly we got like lots of customer calls on Visual Studio. Hey, I updated Visual Studio. It doesn't work anymore. What do you do? Well, you broke my code. And people sometimes don't even go to the level of like looking at the errors. Like, no, it compiled yesterday, I update it, and it doesn't compile. It's your fault. I don't care what it is. Deal with it, right? So that's one of the reasons why we have to be very careful about that. Again, we have some solutions around that. This is demo or example of how we look at the API usage. So for example, this is looked up dictionary, and over here, like this is kind of for the entire type, and over here this is public part. You will see like NuGet.org, how much popular it is. So over here it's 30% of apps, or actually NuGet.org is 40% of libraries use dictionary of and API port telemetry. There's this tool which kind of allows you to assess a portability of application when you migrate into .NET Core. So we have that telemetry and data from that, and this is how we show that. So for example, whoever or from all the people who kind of send us this telemetry, more than 50% actually are using dictionary. So it's even more popular in applications. Unfortunately for us, we actually don't have. It's great that like on NuGet we can download the entire NuGet, analyze it, the IL and everything. Same with telemetry we get. We don't get information about almost any other application. So all the ASP.NET applications on framework, all the console applications, UI applications, WPF applications, unless someone explicitly sends us code, which is extremely rare, we don't know what's happening out there. So this is our best approximation, and even this is not perfect in the sense like, it's quite possible that, the dictionary is used actually in 90% of the applications and only 50% of libraries. We just don't know. But it's better than nothing and making, making decisions based on just like thinking. So over here, I'm going to show I mentioned the obsolete obsolete problems. So we actually just 2 weeks ago, we finally announced officially the API Analyzer, which is a thing that kind of can go after two things. So first of all, it allows us to, in a mild way, obsolete APIs, which means kind of give really, hey, don't use this API, it's old, you should use something else. But it has the option that you can easily say, nope, I know better. I want this API use, don't bother me about that, but tell me all the other ones. So that's one thing, and it will tell you as well differences between platforms, because guess what? Some things are between Linux and Windows, or even distros or Mac, just don't work exactly the same. Luckily, it's like 0.001%, but it's still a number. So if you look at actually a .NET blog, you can find there's 5-minute actually video, which basically does something, does demo like here, even better. So check it out, and we're seeking actively feedback on that. So please go there, use it, tell us what you think. It's actually in his GitHub repository on the platform compat, so you can file issues and help us make it right. So what does it do? It's actually a Rosalyn Analyzer. Here's one snapshot. This is an example of console.windowed, and it will tell you like, hey, this is not supported on, this isn't supported on Linux and Mac OS. So that's great that you call it. You claim that this application is portable, but watch out that this is not going to work on those two platforms. By the way, how we do that by automatic analyzing of which APIs throw platform not supported exception. So, and then we have to actually manually revision that, because sometimes it's over-reporting, because sometimes we have like, oh, if the argument is this value and that value, then throw platform not supported exception. But in majority of the cases, it's fine, it's just gonna work. So the tooling, can't of course decide that. So, we have to manually modify it a little bit later. All the sources are basic, but by the way, in there in the repo, so including you can see there the static list of all the things that we kind of obsoleted or platform not supported. Here's another thing. So we have just a handful, I believe, 20, 30 APIs, which are actually in .NET standard. But they are missing on .NET Framework 4.6.1. Those are the poor things that have been introduced, I believe, in .NET Core 1.1. Back then, we had some plans and things, and then we decided that .NET Framework 4.6.1 has to support the .NET Standard 2.0. So we had two options: either do things that should not be done, which means in .NET Standard 2.0, so newer version, because the .NET Core 1.1 was .NET Standard 1.6 actually. So in the newer version of standard, suddenly remove something, which is, wait a sec, like, standards are usually additive, right? It just doesn't make sense. Or the other option would say like, yeah, it's, .NET 4.6.1, satisfies the, the standard, except this small asterisk of 20 APIs. The good news is those APIs are not, used too much. And here's the example of one, the UpContext.data, because they were not in the public for long enough for people to get dependencies. It's only basically in .NET Core 1.1. So we decided that this is the lesser of the evils that we could do. And the last thing, this is the deprecated API or obsoleted API, so whatever we call it, for example, array list. I forgot about that one. Actually, this one doesn't tell you like, oh, you should use something else, but we have examples, for example, system of mail. Over there, we basically say, yep, you know what, this is obsoleted or deprecated. Feel free to, the bottom line is like, feel free to use it. It's gonna work as it did, but it's not high performance, it's not it might not implement all the latest standards. If you want that, go use MailKit. And we have like HTTP listener is another example, something that, yep, take it as it is. If you don't like it, go use Kestrel. So that's what it is for. And there's great value actually in the fact that it's Rosalyn Analyzer. It's shipped right now. It's shipped in its NuGet package. Because if we make a mistake, or if we realize that, oh, and we should obsolete all those 20 APIs, we can do that retroactively. If we would store that information in the obsolete attribute in the platform, in the BCL itself, we would have to reship the framework, which is actually lots of work. So this is kind of much better. And on top of that, we can actually go back and obsolete things even in .NET Framework 1.0. The fact that it's kind of on the side and the sidecar, we have much more flexibility, which I love actually. Eventually we're gonna figure out like how to make it part of some SDK or something like that, so you don't have to download the standalone NuGet package. But we need some feedback. We need to convince ourselves this is the right way. We're thinking about it right. So that's gonna come later. All right. So what I promised that I'm gonna get to the team culture changes and like involving contributors and that stuff. So here we are. So what changed with coming open source with .NET Core? So one of the key things is that kind of the discussions are in the open, and I'm not sure how about you, but my experience, or I think more people's experience, is that sometimes it's just so much easier to walk on someone's office and start talking with them, or pick up the phone like, hey, what did you mean by this? Oh, that, oh no, okay. So you kind of resolve that. Now, when you are in the open source, you cannot do that this much. Like these kind of hallway discussions are kind of hurting the fact. So we're trying to have like as much of those discussions in the open, which means in the written form, which oftentimes takes longer because it's not so. First of all, it's not so interactive. You write something, then you notice like 1 hour later, oh, the other person already replied or something. It just drags on for longer. And on top of that, sometimes it's, when you write things, you're not so super clear. It's, or if someone doesn't understand something in the beginning, like they will ask, and it just takes more time. But anyway, it's still valuable. We don't try to kind of shut off the hallway discussions, but at least we're encouraging our engineers, like, okay, if you have the hallway discussion, just go back to the issue and say like, oh, we just discussed this offline. Here are the takeaways. Here's the reasons why. This is what we discussed, at least like the end of the discussion. But it's an important thing. Other important thing is actually having good onboarding discussion, documentation for new contributors, how to start, right? Some documentations, tooling, how to use it. Here's the trick, the trouble is that Microsoft employees are, another problems? Microsoft employees are often, or at least on our team, are often kind of trained to live with pain. Because especially when you work on framework, on something lower, very low, you're so early that Visual Studio doesn't support the latest version, because you basically create new fork of the new, or you start working on new version at the time that the product actually almost was not shipped, or maybe already just shipped, right? They didn't add the new targets and everything, so it doesn't happen over time. So you're basically limited. You have to do hacks and things. And once you have to do at the early beginning the hacks and you find your ways around, then it's just easier to push out the proper solution for later. But then therefore there's period of time which is usually non-trivial when you live through pain. You learn how to work around. Guess what? People who coming from outside is like, well, I tried it. I have to do these 20 steps. Why? I was like, well, yeah, we could make it better. It's just hasn't been priority so far. And at the beginning, we had to kind of go through some pain, so we just forgot to remove the pain yet. So that's a little bit challenge, something we have to be very careful about. Other things is actually communication, especially on GitHub, on kind of in the public, is kind of a little bit sensitive. Or basically the key thing that we have to be more, or we're trying to be more polite, or not more. We're trying to be polite, let me call it that way. Welcoming, patient, making discussions constructive, and not like, oh my gosh, you did something wrong. It was like, okay, tell us how you would solve it. Don't just tell us that this is entire pile of crap, right? Some people do that. Some of the key things actually that contribute to that is that we have, on GitHub, we have people who are English as second language. I'm personally English as second language as well, but I've been in US for 12 years, so I think I'm kind of okay. But I totally feel with people who come, with very basic English knowledge, and it's hard for them to express themselves. But that's something we have to be, if someone is unclear, we have to kind of try to help them, like, what do you mean? Ask questions and be kind of welcoming. That's something we have to focus on as well. Otherwise, we would just, not get contributions and bug reports from these people, which we would be missing out. Oftentimes, people are basically don't give us any repro steps, or it's extremely complex. And it's like, hey, my application doesn't work, fix it. It's like, just create small repro. Like, even if you tell me like, oh, I tried, it didn't work. Like, okay, try harder. Because guess what's gonna happen if you give me large application? So first of all, sometimes you cannot give me the large application because there are some secrets, it's some enterprise, and you just cannot. But let's say that you can. Guess what's gonna be my first step, where I'm gonna spend probably first 2 or 3 hours? To beating out, basically do binary search, deleting half of the application left and right until I have something I can reason about. Because if I have to debug something large things, it's honestly, it can be done, but it's like 2 times, 5 times more as complex as having something small and debugging something small. So just like take the time and navigate people to, hey, give us this, at least give us some repro steps, and ideally try to work on them, make them smaller, so that we can work with them. Oftentimes we see frustration, from people on GitHub, as in like, guys, you have this bug for 10 years, how come you didn't fix it? Like, well, this is the first time we heard about it, so you might be, people assume that we know everything. Basically, we know about all the teeny tiny things. They come to me like, oh, this HTTP client, like, this IDOS posable, like, well, we actually knew about this one, or this thingy, like, it doesn't work, like, when are you gonna fix it? Well, when are you gonna file the report? Is there an existing bug? Like, I don't know, well, we'll look it up. Okay, if it's sitting there for 10 years and we ignored it for 10 years, you might be right, but oftentimes it's not the case. Sometimes we actually get abuse as well, and a kind of aggressiveness for on .NET, so not only on .NET, on GitHub, which are the people who kind of come and it's like, just fix it. Like, they use swear words. They're like, this is absolutely horrible. It's like, calm down. We're all engineers. We are all trying to do the best. We are not trying to make your life harder. We're actually trying to help you. Just acknowledge that. Take it easy. Let's be constructive. It's quite challenging. Some people luckily just a few or very small number that cannot get over that. Another actually interesting challenge is that we as Microsoft employees, or especially me in the role of like managing the repo, oftentimes we have to drive consensus, like because there's like even from the community there's different opinions, our engineers have different opinions, and it's extremely hard to have your own opinion and also drive the consensus, because it often can come up like, oh no, you just choose your thing because you use the power because you're the best. We're not doing that. At least not intentionally, believe me. So sometimes it's it's hard to say like hey, in my opinion, this is how it should look like. But let's step back. We have like these 3 proposals. Let's find out. Let's vote for them, or let's take them. So you have to basically separate like 2 roles, kind of the mediator and as well someone who's technically involved. Last slide before closing. So how do we involve contributors and community? So we already did 2 CoreFX contributors stand-ups. It's supposed to be monthly cadence. One was before I went on vacation in June. Second one was 1.5 months ago. So yeah, we're gonna get to the monthly-ish cadence eventually, but take it with a grain of salt, but we have that. The goal of the contributors stand-up, and it's really contributors, is about have bidirectional communication with the people who are helping, who work often in CoreFX repo. Basically find out what we don't know. Example, not that we can do anything about that, but we had people saying like, hey, the two-factor authentication actually on GitHub, it's painful because I'm a student, I switch computers every day, I go to the lab and I have to always 2FA, and it's just pain in the ass. Well, we couldn't fix that because it's kind of built into GitHub, but it's good to know about these kind of painful things that people see. Or including like, hey, I have to do these 10 steps, like how come? Like, why is it so complicated to build your product? And we look like, yeah, every of our engineers has a batch script for that. Maybe we should publish the batch script or make it easier. So those are the things we're trying to get. Those stand-ups are live streaming. We have actually chat open during that, where people can ask questions, can have discussions. And on that repo, we actually use voting on topics, what we're gonna cover in the next one. So if you're interested, I would first suggest to become a contributor, and then it's the right venue for you. The other things I mentioned, the API design reviews. As of, I think, middle August or end of August, we actually started doing the API design reviews publicly. So with live streaming, again, we have chat open during that, and that's weekly cadence. That's the Tuesdays morning, basically, again, Pacific time. And over there on the .NET API reviews repo, you can see the list and links to the videos we did in the past, including actually what I usually do, except one exception. I'm gonna have to do that. we're gonna put there like, hey, at this minute we discuss this thing, at that minute we discuss that thing. On top of that, I try to put there list of people and when they appeared. So when you look at the video, you have idea who's talking and how people are thinking about stuff. We have some plans for future. We have them for quite some time, but we're slowly going through that. One thing is that we want to do kind of more .NET technology Q&A sessions. Maoni, actually from GC team, she came to me in June. She wanted to do something like that, and back then it was before the first CoreFX stand-up, so I thought we basically have a deal that we will first find out how these live sessions work, which we did by now, and then we're gonna start doing some ad hoc, like let's talk about technology. So I, actually once I come from this conference, I plan to come to Maoni and maybe send her email today and try to schedule something that for December or for January, some kind of 1 hour, 2 hour, GC hardcore, online talk, or not only talk but much more Q&A session. Another thing, actually, we want to kind of, I would like to start releasing some alpha versions, as in like, good snapshots, ideal on monthly cases, so that community can pick it up. Today, the community can pick up the daily builds, but how daily builds go, they are, sometimes are not so great, in great shape, they don't work that great. So that's something that we would like to get to, and there are some more ideas. I should update them on the Karel Zikmund GitHub IO. You can check them up over there. Some of them are a bit obsolete. All right, this is it. Thank you very much for listening. If you have, I'm interested in feedback. I'm interested if you have heard about alternative, suggestions or existing solutions. If you have ideas all around managing issues or like this community engagement, whatever, or you just want to chat, find me or contact me. I'll be more than happy to talk with you or chat with you. Thank you. And we might have one question or two questions time if someone has any.
Hi, thank you. Questions about, can you back to the previous slide? Yeah, contributor stand-ups. How many contributors, participants on these stand-ups?
I think that we usually have like about 20 active people like on the chat. And I think there's roughly 150 views or something like that. So
it's active contributors.
Yes.
It's on the previous slide. You mean some about 40.
Yes, those are 40 engineers, Microsoft engineers. Okay, yeah. These are external contributors. I apologize. That's what I meant.
Yeah. My questions. I mean, because I'm working on this. On the framework within the company, and we have some problems with organize the discussions. And when I would say about 10 people join the discussion, it's just a bit a mess.
Yeah, I hear you.
So how you resolve such problem to discuss particular issues within contributor?
Yeah. So over there, the topics we cover are pretty broad. So let's actually look at that. It's CoreFX stand-up. Do I have the topics from the last one? Probably not. Anyway, in the issues. These are the topics we have there. So we choose one topic for the stand-up, and it's from our side it's roughly 4 or 5 people discussing, and basically the community contributors who are there. Actually, we had with that videos we have like 20-30 of them online actively. 20. Let's call it 20. They are just like sending questions via IM, and that's how we facilitate the discussion. So it's not super interactive. We actually tried the first one having people on the call, and we figured that actually they don't want to speak up in front of 20 people. They rather type the question in IM. It's like, okay, whatever. So that's the default we do right now.
Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you. And one more question.
Oh, I'm showing something and it doesn't show. Awesome. Sorry, should have told me. And this is, so for the CoreFX stand-up, like overall, roughly 400 views. So maybe 200 people viewed that, maybe 100, I don't know. So overall time. Anyway, sorry, your question.
Thank you, Karel, for this presentation.
Thanks.
Talking about A lot of pull requests and issues that you get. Can you describe or tell us about one of the last important one or funny pull requests that you achieve?
When was last what?
Last PR?
That I did personally?
Not
No.
you, maybe you know about it. But you was critical or important?
Oh man, I could spend hours talking about that.
Maybe you get some.
We have like, you know, if you look at actually something I said yesterday, the .NET blog, Stephen Taub, I'm not gonna search for it now. Stephen Taub had a blog post about actually perf improvements in .NET Core 2.0, and you find out actually the things he picked up, like half of them came from community. So those are important things. They helped significantly speed up, you know, basic APIs quite significantly. Other things we had system drawing port actually from Linux being helped out from community. We had on directory services, we get actually tests contributed by community. From top of my head, yeah, there's plenty of examples. There's smaller ones, there's larger ones, you know, whatever, you know, it's all scale. Does that answer your question a little bit?
Yes.
Okay.